To all of the faculty and parents and friends and siblings and graduates, congratulations, which is what I should open with. So, congratulations to all of you. Every so often, I get invited to do a commencement address, and each time I stand in front of people, I see, excited, eager faces of undergrads who are graduating, and that's kind of awesome. But from up here, I can also see the horrified look of your parents. We're like horrified that after all those student loans, your school invited a guy best known for playing a stoner to deliver commencement remarks. And they're thinking, this is it? This is what we get? Yes, this is what we get. This is it. So it's true, I played a stoner 1 or 3 times. And I played a few doctors, had the privilege of working at the White House, acted in a few teen comedies about dudes making babies, and am now finally finishing up grad school in national security. So I was trying to figure out what to talk about, and I figured I would just talk about the connection between Benghazi and marijuana policy. I'm glad you knew that was a joke. I was testing that joke out with friends, and they're like, I don't know, it's hit or miss. So when I actually did get the invitation to speak here, the email said the topic of your speech should be, quote, how graduates can apply critical thinking skills to discern amongst information sources in their post-college life where they will no longer have faculty to guide them. And I had no idea what this meant. So I took it piece by piece. I said, okay, how graduates can apply critical thinking skills. Okay, I did that part, how you analyze stuff. Then to discern among information sources. Okay, that basically means using analysis to figure out what's real and what's fake. In their post-college life, that must mean starting tomorrow, where they will no longer have faculty to guide them. Okay, so a world in which grades don't matter. So basically, I'm supposed to give you, life advice once you wake up tomorrow, or Monday. Now I'm going to say, I don't know that I have any advice that I think you should actually follow, and I really didn't know what to write, so basically I've come up with a collection of experiences that myself and friends of mine have gone through. I'm a little worried that it might come off kind of self-centered, but I can assure you that's because I really actually just have no actual skills with which to impart you on your graduation day. Not major engineering, it might have been a smarter choice. Now I'm just hosting a show about it. The guys who are in the back, if you want to apply for it, we'll get a second season, go to discovery.com. The reason that I kind of half joke, but I'm also half serious about not knowing whether my advice is good or bad is I took not 4 years to graduate as an undergrad. I was working while I was an undergrad, so it took a little extra time. I struggled as an aspiring actor for about 5 or 6 years eating ramen and beans out of a can, which I know is encouraged for college students, but I promise you as of Monday it will no longer be look highly upon. I finally am finishing grad school this spring, but it took me 8 years. No, don't move, because it's not a PhD. And to be perfectly honest, it's not even a master's. It's something called a graduate certificate, which is like a third of a master's. 8 years! Most people complete that in 12 months. So, again, I don't know that I can offer any tangible advice. So I'm just going to offer these observations. I think that when you look back on your college years, you will remember the handful of classes that were your favorite. You'll remember your favorite professors, but I think the things that at least I remember the most are random things, like my dorm or my apartment, my best friends, a ton of the crazy stories that I remembered from my 5.5 years at college. I think you'll remember that, especially if you Facebooked those pictures at 2 in the morning. And then even if you took them down by like 10:30 when you woke up, somebody's still saved them. And they'll send them to you randomly years from now when you're sitting at your desk. You'll get an email from a college friend, or maybe that's just me, but those photos are out there. But I think the point was when you leave college, there's really no reason to stop living your life, to stop reading incredible books, to stop having new experiences that might kind of terrify you. Those are all really good things. For those of you who were fortunate enough to get jobs in a recovering economy, you know that you're going to be blessed with financial stability. Those of you who are still looking might feel pretty stressed. And if you watch too much CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, you might be inclined to get immediately cynical about your prospects. And it's true, you might not get your dream job right out of the gate. I know I didn't. Maybe you'll end up working in a job that you didn't want ever, or you might be working odd jobs like I did for a very long time before something clicks. I think for some of you, namely those of you who majored in the arts or social sciences like I did, it's something of an oddly chosen phenomenon, right? That we like know that this is going to happen to us, but we still major in this stuff. But I would urge you not to succumb to that cynicism that's so rampant out there. I mean, everybody knows the stories about, you know, the economic crisis and the housing crisis and big banks and people that signed up for mortgages they couldn't afford, all this stuff that will make your head explode if you focus on it too much. And you should understand it. But the reason that I kind of harp on that a little bit is I think what the media rarely talks about are the amazing stories that are unique only to your generation, to this generation. Rarely covered in the press are reports like the ones about you guys being the most public service driven generation that this country has ever seen. And it's not just because of private sector job loss. It's actually because of a culture of public and community service that permeates so much of what you do. Everything from church and temple and mosque volunteer groups to fraternity and sorority volunteer days, and way beyond that. When the recession started in 2008, the private sector shed about 7% of its jobs, which was even more for young people. It was huge, really devastating to the job market for graduates. So accordingly, you might think that, okay, the following year, you might see a 7% increase in people applying for jobs in the nonprofit world, if that was the same decrease in the private sector. But in reality, what happened with all of your peers is that in 2009, programs like AmeriCorps saw not a 7% increase, but a 300% increase in applications. So that's how service-driven I think you guys are. Another thing that we rarely hear about is how well you get along with your peers. Frankly, how much better you get along with your peers than some of the older folks. So, you know, if you turn on the TV, there's a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who are yelling and screaming at each other, and it makes fantastic television as a TV guy. But it doesn't really talk about things that are maybe tangible or anything that's real. But for young people, my experience, particularly working in Washington, D.C., was totally different, and I'll give you an example. Young evangelical conservative groups have been quietly working with young progressive environmental groups to tackle challenges related to climate change. And this is just one example. And in the case of young evangelicals, their view is that God has put us here to take care of his green earth. And in the case of young progressives, they hold the view that corporate irresponsibility is what needs to be curbed. Now, neither group would likely vote for the same person in an election. But here they are, working together very quietly for a common goal that most young people actually care about. All of this while the Senate in DC, which has an average age of 62, by the way, does nothing, right? And so those incredible young, passionate people are actually working together. And I think that that is incredibly inspiring for the world that you guys are going to go out there and change starting on Monday. Now, outside of nonprofit and public service, this is also the most tech-savvy and creative generation that we have ever seen. Partially evidenced by, what was the hashtag you gave out at the beginning? UTA grad celebration. And then I have at Twitter at Kal Penn, just FYI. But so, you know, you're incredibly tech-savvy. Scores of your peers and young Americans have put their creative and technical and business skills to use and started their own companies. And I'm not talking about like the billionaire tech companies, which is awesome if you have plans to do that. But what I'm actually talking about are small companies that are started in dorm rooms or parents' basements or storefronts. And I've had the chance to meet a lot of these people. There's a guy named Chris Ura, who's a Notre Dame grad from West Virginia, who started a company called Sustain You. And Sustain You employs young Americans by taking old cotton shirts, recycling the materials here in the United States, and then selling these new branded energy-friendly shirts in the US and in Canada. And they started really small and are growing into these incredible contracts that they've just landed with a bunch of universities. Also had the chance to meet an amazing woman named Erica Nakamura. She and her wife Amelia started a free-range, organic, small butcher shop in California that focuses on community-based sustainability and healthy eating. They're in their 20s, and they've exploded huge. So these are just two examples. There are so many more of your peers, your generation, doing amazing things in the arts, in food service, engineering, technology, energy, and everything way beyond. And I think that these stories rarely make the national news because, news cycles tend to be kind of sensational and a little bit cynical. But these people who are your age, maybe a little bit older, have all of their stories out there, and I think it's really incredible and inspiring to see. If you're one of those people who has a passion for any of these things, and I'm probably talking more towards those of us who majored in the social sciences or the arts, I know that if that's the only woo that I got for mentioning the social sciences, one woo, that was bad. But a lot of people that you talk to, right, particularly when you're graduating, you might have a tough time explaining to them how your happiness can come from something other than just quick financial stability. And a lot of them might think you're crazy. I know that I was crazy. They still think you're crazy, frankly. So they might think you're crazy because you want to do something like join the Peace Corps or volunteer somewhere. They might think you're crazy if you feel passionate about paying twice as much for a pair of clothes that are actually made in America, but you want to do that. Or you're cultivating a garden, or you're starting a company in your parents' basement. A lot of people think that new ideas are insane. A lot of people thought that I was crazy, and a lot of my friends were crazy, which is why I love talking about these examples. But this is a trend that you should know will only increase after college. If people thought you were crazy for majoring in something, just wait until you're actually out there in the real world, and they'll think you're crazy for actually trying to pursue these things. If you're not breaking in the dough right away, your family pressure might build. If you're not entirely financially stable within a few years, or if you do something like grab a backpack and go volunteer somewhere else in the world with no money in your pocket, paying for it as you go, people might call you crazy for that. None of that is a bad thing. My point is that I've never had a friend who was called crazy who didn't also do something awesome. They struggled, but they did something awesome. There's a guy named David Shore who created the TV show House that I had the privilege of being on. David studied law in Toronto. And after practicing law for a while in Toronto, he decided that he was going to pack up his car and move to Los Angeles to try his hand at screenwriting. And by any stretch of the imagination, people must have thought that David Shore was crazy. He's a successful lawyer practicing in a major global city, and he's giving it all up for the potential of a career with zero stability. And yet, eventually, he created a series of hit shows, he won a few Emmy Awards, and most importantly, he is very happy being creative and doing what he loves. And that sort of illustrates another lesson that I learned since graduation that I kind of wish I had heard before, which is to never really wait for someone else to give you an opportunity. I mean, you can do that if you want, and particularly if you're on a path that requires a certain set amount of schooling, it probably makes sense. But as technology and society both change and expand, there are a lot of opportunities to do things on your own. I'm going to give you an example that I think you'll enjoy, but it's going to require a brief history lesson of the media. And I'll start with asking you how you interact with the media every day. So if you think about how do you actually interact with the media every day, yes, it's things like newspapers and TV and movies, but it's also stuff like Reddit, video games, Pandora, Twitter, and Instagram. These are all things like this. You guys are walking around campus like this. You're actually being hit with and bombarded by a bunch of different media images. And these are all known as socialization agents, right? So anyone who sociology majors or anthropology majors, you probably know that by the time the average American high school student graduates, she or he will have spent more time in front of the television than in front of the classrooms, in front of the teacher. That only increases presumably once you're in college, because you're in the classroom much less of the time. And in recent years, that can be a little more relevant because the number of companies that are producing the mass media has shrunk. Now there are only about 5 companies left producing media content. There are Viacom, News Corporation, Walt Disney, Time Warner, and General Electric. And they own pretty much everything, ESPN, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, TNT, all of this stuff. And media is very concentrated. So for all of the interactions that we have and all of the messages that they send us, there are only 5 left. And the perception that I think a lot of people have is there's no way you can break through and enter the media. There's no way to change it if you want to change something. And a lot of people point to, most media outlets are for profit. So selling a TV show or selling a new app is a lot like selling a new car or a pair of jeans. And so some people get a little bummed out about that. And there are 2 arguments here. One is that the media that's so concentrated, that's owned by just 5 companies, is going to lead to media products that lack diversity. And I don't just mean ethnic or racial diversity, I mean diversity in terms of like the types of TV shows. So for example, people will point to, I can't believe I'm about to say this. So why is there toddlers and tiaras and Honey Boo Boo on TV? I think this is probably the only graduation speech that cited Honey Boo Boo. I hope it was for all our sake. But the point is, right, the argument is that since there's such concentration in the media, that's going to result in TV shows looking alike. So there are going to be a ton of cop shows, a ton of doctor shows, a ton of reality TV that all look the same. The counter-argument to that is that media that's owned by just a few is going to result in a lot more diversity because all of these companies are going to pool their resources. So if you've got a conglomerate that owns something else, that tiny company is going to have the resources of the conglomerate. I'll give you an example of this. So I did this movie called The Namesake. It was generally, it's an awesome book too if you guys have a chance to read it. It was a book first for those of you who are literary folks, don't worry. But it was considered a relatively small movie. It was an independent film. It was co-financed by 3 companies, one Japanese, one Indian, and then a company called Fox Searchlight, which is a subsidiary of News Corporation. And when I went into the marketing meeting at Fox Searchlight in LA before the movie came out, and this was probably 6 years ago, so even before Twitter, before Facebook, we sat down and they said, "Do you have a MySpace?" I said, "I don't. Why?" I said, "Well, we want to, we're using MySpace for a little bit of cross-promotion. Are you open to setting up a MySpace page?" I said, "Sure, but just so you guys know, there's creepily 35 fake Kal Penn MySpace pages, and none of them are me, so I don't know if it'll do any good to, establish a real one." And they said, "Oh, don't worry, we can just get rid of those for you." Like, get rid of what? Like, get rid of the 35 fake MySpace profiles. Like, how? Aren't you guys a tiny movie company? They said, "Oh no, we're owned by News Corporation, and News Corporation just bought MySpace, so we'll just get rid of it for you." What do you mean? Like, don't worry, just after this meeting, when you go home, we'll send you an email later today, and somebody will walk you through it. No joke, by the time I got home, there was already an email, and there was a phone number of a guy at MySpace to call, and I called this guy, and he walked me through this process that took about 3 minutes. I set up a real MySpace profile for this movie, and they got rid of the 35 fake ones in a matter of a couple of minutes. And I just sat there and I thought, this is gangsta. You are telling me that you own something else, and so literally in 3 minutes by the time I got home, this is just all taken care of? That is amazing. So, those are the 2 counterexamples, right? Some people believe it results in less diversity, some in more diversity and more resources. But the point that I was trying to make is that regardless, since there's such concentration in the media, a lot of media models are very archaic, they're really old. And technology and creativity are changing too quickly for a lot of people who are currently CEOs or even senators or members of Congress who are working on legislation related to emerging technologies. Things are moving too fast for them to keep up. And the point of the story was, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I graduated from college, it was 5 or 6 years when I was eating beans out of a can. I had a lot of other friends who were in the same position. And 3 of them in particular were, working odd jobs like I was, but when they would come home at night, they would grab a digital video camera and they would record these little songs that they would come up with, or record short movies, and they would upload them on a website that they created called The Lonely Island. And they started uploading this stuff, and then over the course of several years, more and more people started taking notice. And these 3 guys are Andy Samberg, Jorma Taccone, and Akiva Schaffer. And they all end up getting these awesome gigs on Saturday Night Live, and their careers completely take off. And as their careers took off, all of their digital shorts that they made, suddenly they're making for SNL. And so NBC Universal owns it. And all of a sudden, all of these shorts and all these awesome songs that they made in their living rooms are now being made and broadcast on national television. And I opened up the Wall Street Journal one day, and on the front page was an article about how Andy, Akiva, and Jorma's content that was on YouTube, fans uploaded it from SNL onto YouTube, and so NBC Universal was suing YouTube for a ton of money because of copyright infringement. And I was reading this article like, this is insane. 3 of our buddies who just knew how to take advantage of technology, were incredibly creative and incredibly talented, and didn't wait around for anybody to say yes to an idea they had, are suddenly the reason why NBC Universal is suing YouTube. I thought that was awesome. But that was an example of how all these emerging technologies are, the folks that run this stuff are really slow to catch up, and policy is really slow to be dictated. When I was working at the White House, my member of Congress has 400 followers, so I'm pretty sure we know how to use social media. I'm sitting there shaking my head like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You guys are going to vote on this stuff and you have no idea how technology works. But the silver lining to that is that I think that if you know how technology works, if you've grown up with it, if you're using it, if you're about to graduate and enter this field where there's such a void, there are really good people out there who really need the advice to do the right thing. They just don't know how. So you guys can literally change the face of these amazing, exciting industries like Andy, Akiva, and Norma had the chance to do. And I think that through that process, failure is okay, as long as you figure out how you actually define success for yourself. I think having money in your pocket is a good test, but it's not the only key to happiness. And I know that you might kind of be cynically sitting there saying, okay, look, you're just an out-of-touch celebrity saying that money doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it matters very much. But I'm also saying that happiness and financial stability are not the only correlation. If they were, then every person that you saw on TMZ or in Us Weekly would be happy, not drunk and yelling at each other. So figure out, would you say you're successful if in 2 or 3 years you find love? Would you say you're successful if you find a job that you love? What about a job that you hate but pays you a ton of money to do something else that you love? All of that kind of sounds cliche. There are things you probably thought of. But stay with me. When I'm talking about failure, I don't mean something. I failed college statistics twice, so I had absolutely no bearing on anything I've ever done, so I'm not talking about that. Probably because I majored in film, though. If you're majoring in, statistics, it probably matters if you fail in statistics. But what I'm talking about is taking risks. So before you settle down, take time to move to a city that freaks you out, or apply for a job that you're nervous about taking. Maybe you chose college because everyone in your family went to college. Maybe you chose college because you're the first. Maybe you thought that it would help you get a job when you graduate, or maybe you decided to learn something because you care very deeply for the world and wanted to learn more about the social inequities that exist. You're always going to be having people tell you that you need to be more practical. I don't actually think you need to be. I remember vividly in high school, my high school guidance counselor called me into her office my senior year. She sat me down and she told me that my desire to work in both the film industry and in public service was impossible. She disapprovingly looked at me and she said, "Kal, you can't have your cake and eat it too, you know what I mean?" And to this day, that phrase really weirds me out because I think it's really oversimplified bad advice. I do realize now that what she probably meant to say was that there were incredible risks in what I wanted to do, and that it was going to be very scary, and that I would probably spend years working odd jobs and living in really shady apartments. Like really shady. If we were grabbing beers, I would totally tell you stories about these shady apartments. But I won't here. And that you might be making very little money with no guarantee of success or stability, and that I could fail. Now, had she said all of those things, she would have been absolutely correct. All of those things happened before I became a working actor and before I had the chance to work at the White House. But in reality, I don't consider those 5 or 6 years to be wasted years. And I don't think any of the things that I struggled through were signs of failure. And I hope you don't consider those things to be a sign of failure either as you struggle on the path that starts on Monday. Because as you go through those insecure years, I think the only definition of failure is when you stop enjoying that journey and decide to give up. And by the way, if you fail or have a setback, that's not the same thing as necessarily giving up. It also doesn't mean, by the way, that you have to be one of those annoying people who says everything happens for a reason. No, everything does not happen for a reason. Sometimes really terrible things happen, and sometimes there is no reason. Sometimes amazing things also happen, and there's not necessarily a reason for that either. But I think that's precisely the magic of life, right? That there's incredible tragedy and frustration and incredible elation, and there might not be a reason for it. So enjoy your journey. especially as you guys are doing things and taking jobs or being in situations that you don't entirely ideally want to be part of. The topic of my speech was supposed to be how graduates can apply critical thinking skills to discern among information sources in their post-college life when they no longer have faculty to guide them. Great. Your amazing faculty, who I had the chance to spend a little bit of time with today, have given you some of the greatest tools that have prepared you for life. Not just the technical stuff, but really challenging concepts that help you think and help you problem solve. Your friends have hopefully taught you that outside of the classroom, life does not have to be about climbing any sort of a ladder. Certainly not one that's already been built by anyone else before you. It means that you might choose to take a traditional job, or you might become athletes or authors, or join the military, or start a company. Maybe you'll develop a passion for something entirely new. You guys all have the privilege, the incredible privilege of graduating from an amazing university with a set of skills and talents and opportunities that really very, very, very few people in the world have. And you can do anything that you want. You and your parents, your families, your grandparents, someone who is sitting next to you or who is just a text away, made incredible and immense sacrifices for you to be sitting here today. So I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you go tour with a band or write a book. I hope that you travel, that you fail, that you succeed, and that you go and live life. I hope that you get to play a doctor and a stoner. Go work for a president. Go make some babies. Turn off. Thank you. Turn off the mainstream news, and please don't let anyone else define happiness for you. Thank you so much, and congratulations.